All right, and the next one. All right, here we go. So I mentioned I wanted to live a more altruistic life, merging my profession and my passion, which is the Phluid Project. And the Phluid Project, if you haven't heard of us, is a gender-free brand. I'll tell you more about it, but what I decided to do based on basically the advice of, like there wasn't a person who thought this was a good idea, but to open up a store on Broadway. And the reason I opened up a store is I really wanted to get to know the customer, get to know who the consumer was, and get to know the community. I wanted to earn trust, gain knowledge, and every single day was like a focus group for me. And I really spent about 2 years almost every day in the store, learning about the community, and then sharing. That was what I like to do, what I learned in that time, and what I continue to learn. Next. All right, so the reality is, and I think all of us know this, and when we talk about this today, that we are the center of a cultural zeitgeist. What does that mean? Next. Here's a great quote from a stakeholder at Phluid, who says, "We Gen Z are the first generation to say, hey, wait, stop. What are we doing things the way we've always done them? We're the first generation to question the status quo every single time." So they're really challenging us to challenge the status quo. And within the queer community, we're seeing a shift as we become, I use the word normalized. And the shift that's happening in this space is we're moving from who we go to bed with, which is our sexual orientation, to who we go to bed as, which is our gender identity. Next. So at the same time, this is interesting, something very scary is happening. So GLAAD does a survey each year, and they didn't release this statistic, but it's shocking. It says that for the first time since they've been doing polling, that millennials are having less support of the queer community than ever before. And the reason that's happening is because they say that as young queer people, we're making it so confusing because it's not about sexual orientation, but it's about gender identity. And it's impacting a lot of people. So this is, without getting too much into it, but this is how we break out through the gender unicorn. There's your sex, which is how you're assigned at birth, your gender identity, which is not always, intersected. If your sex is birth at male and you identify as male, you're cisgendered. If your sex at birth is male and you identify as female, you're transgender. And there's a lot of folks who identify in between. Gender expression has nothing to do with who you want to go to bed with or how you identify, and who you're sexually attracted to has nothing to do with your identity, your expression, or your identity. Just a little bit of information. I could spend a whole hour on this, but I will spare you that. But if you're interested, let me know. Pronouns are becoming more commonplace, and I'll share some statistics around that. And next, because everybody likes data, I'll dig into some data. So how big is the LGBTQ community? It's $1 trillion in purchasing power. 75% of the queer community stays loyal to queer-friendly brands. Right now, this is really interesting. Only 48% of Gen Z identify as exclusively heterosexual. So that means we've got a queer generation. Over 52% identify somewhere on the queer spectrum. And when it comes to transgender, 1.5 million of US adults identify as transgender, which is a pretty shocking number. If it was a state, the 40th largest state, if the entire state was populated by transgender individuals. Next. And even in more data, just Gen Z, as we know, accounts for $145 billion in spending. What's more interesting, I think, is their influence on their parents and how their parents spend. 80% of parents are influenced by their youth's recommendations. Gen Z is a third of the population. And a really interesting statistic that came out in University of California last year that said in California, youth, teens, a quarter of them identify on the gender spectrum of neither identify as strictly male or female. So nearly a quarter now of young teens identify in the gender spectrum. 81% of Gen Z believe a person should not be defined by their gender, which is a huge generational shift as, many of us worked very hard about especially women, work to be defined by their gender. And now 56% of Gen Z shop across gender lines. So they're Men's, women's department doesn't really matter. They shop across gender lines. The number also, as far as anyone who knows someone who's has a gender neutral pronoun, it's 30%, 33%, and that number is shifting dramatically, getting closer to 50%. The younger people are who are asked. All right, so before I go into the Phluid project and some of the things we're focusing on, just want to know if there's any questions. Feel free to pop them in. I'll keep going just to stay on time. So our mission at the Phluid project is to challenge boundaries with humanity. And we do this through community, activism, education, fashion, retail, and charity. And somebody said, and it really resonated with me, that a product without a community is a commodity. And when I think about Phluid, it is grounded in values, and community is the most important part of who we are and what we do. So the Phluid project is important because society has taught us really, this idea that gender is a social construct. From birth, we're forced into a binary space with the assignment of an M or F on our birth certificates. And along that comes a set of expectations of what it is to be a male, what it is to be a female. There's certainly opportunities, for a woman to be emotional and to have, to be able to cry and be sensitive. And most boys or men are raised to be, aggressive, or whatever we think about these ideas of what is being male or female. And we want to break those apart, both through your expression and your identity. So our mission is to give people the tools and experiences that empower them to reinvent the status quo, to be themselves. Doesn't matter who you are, who you want to be, what you do, where you come from. The Phluid project's a gleaming beacon of hope that the world doesn't need to have to be the way it simply is, because the way it was, and it's always been. No one's challenged this until Generation Z. The press has said a few cool things, which I think is, which really speaks to this idea of who the brand is built for. And this is where fashion meets activism as the world's first gender-free store. So when we launched, this was 2.5 years ago, that I firmly believe that if you lead with your values, if you lead with activism, if you lead with the community, eventually they'll find you. We at Phluid haven't spent $1 yet on marketing. The only money we spend is on community engagement in person and spreading word of mouth. And gender-free shopping is a movement, not a trend, which is really important. Some people call it trend. This is the future, as far as I can see, or part of the future. So we have a value system, which is core to who Phluid is and what we stand for. And I think it's really important. We're redoing our website. It should be up tomorrow, but we're leading with our values. And every time I do a presentation, I lead with values. And we just launched a fragrance line, which will be in Sephora in, a week, and online only, but each of the fragrances are named for our values. Each is a value. And so it's imperative to us to have these values guide us, and to share it with our consumer, who is primarily Generation Z. So it really, encourages and promotes morale on a personal and professional lives apart, or to get alike together. We live in an unlearning and relearning time, and this reality demands both respect and patience. It requires empathy and understanding, and offering and promoting freedom of expression is a key ingredient in trust, and therefore initiates loyalty. Successful recruitment and retention practices are a direct reflection of the company's value system. So our values are acceptance, balance, integrity, intention, and openness. So who do we serve? So at the core, who Phluid serves is the LGBTQ community, specifically the transgender and non-binary community, where there really isn't many safe spaces to shop at all, or to be represented and even welcomed. The broader audience is Generation Z. I call them Generation Z because because they care about others, they care about the planet, they care about all of that. So our broad audience is Gen Z, and then our broader audience outside of it is allies, who, like me and like many of you, have values aligned with Generation Z, and it's just nice to see this entire generation moving forward and progressive and wanting to bring along their friends as well. So how do we show up? How do we engage with our community? We do it through events. We, when pre-COVID and post-COVID, we'll show up with pop-up activation, who our community is, who we employ. I'm only right now a cisgendered white guy on the team. I'm minority in the group of people that work with us because hiring diversity is key and essential for me, both in gender and race and other identities. We have panels and talk about topics. We'll have a panel on Wednesday talking with This Is L, which is a tampon pad line, and talking about bleeding and folks who aren't represented, which are non-binary folks and transmasculine individuals who bleed. And so these are the types of panels and discussions we have, which are really bringing voices that haven't been heard before. We give a lot to charity. We're advocates. We have a decent social platform and growing, and we like to generate press. The things we do, we don't do it for press, but the press tends to be really aligned with what we're doing, and we generate stories. So we don't have to pay for press. They basically come to us when we create something unique and interesting, which is what we continue to do over and over again. And then, I think it's important to collaborate with brands. We're always open to collaborations. Some of the collaborations we've done, I think when you tapped into, there was a milestone for me when we tapped into Generation Z and what they do and what they stand for, when HBO reached out and said they were launching a show called Euphoria, and they wanted to know if we would join them on a pop-up tour across the country. And a lot of folks are scared, afraid of Euphoria and what the future looks, but it's really an incredible insight into who this generation is. And then it's important, I think, to educate too, when it comes to the brand, and my view is to be educational and optimistic. It is the month of trans awareness. It's also the week of Trans Awareness Week this week, and on Friday is the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And I'm wearing a trans button today, just a reminder, but on Friday we'll be pausing to recognize the trans folks who have been taken far too early, and just as educational, just let folks know that the life expectancy of a trans woman of color in the United States is 35 years old. So I can't think of another group that ends life, whether through being murdered, mostly being murdered, taking their life in horrible ways, just something to shine on. So the fact is, we try to turn these statistics into hope, and Mila Jam is one of our partners and allies and advocates for the brand. But yeah, I won't say too much more other than, this is Trans Awareness Week. Learn about the trans community if you can. And if you have questions, please reach out to me on what you can do, or go to our website. So we're not passive, and I'm not sure. I think this is one of the things that Gen Z loves about us, or at least our community, is we stand up for them. We're willing to stand up and challenge. Right now I'm challenging Facebook and Instagram, because when you look at who the brand is, the followers are for the brand, 100% of it, there's two boxes. There's a pink quadrant on the circle and a blue quadrant, and it adds up to 100%. First of all, it just, plays in this idea that pink is female and blue is male, but also it completely eliminates folks who identify as something other than male or female. So I'm challenging that. We challenge Fashion Week to include transgender and non-binary folks in their fashion shows. So we continue to stand up for the community. We're not afraid to lean into a conversation. If it makes some people uncomfortable, we're okay with that. We just keep pushing. And it's become expected by our followers and our community for us to do that. Next. All right. So this is how we create product. I think it's important, especially for Gen Z, that how we create things. So, and one of them, the most important, is solutions. But responsibility. So we try to create products responsibly. We continue to make efforts. They continue to push back and challenge us to find out how we make it, where we make it, who our partners are. I'll be launching a new collection in fall where you can scan the item, and you can find out why it's responsible, where it came from, where it was made, what the elements are about responsibility, so they understand what steps we took to make it compatible and friendly to the earth. We stand for inclusion, not just in price point, but in sizing, working as hard as we can to get up to very small sizes and very large sizes. And we try to find solutions for products. Whatever the issue is, we try to find a solution for it. And we do this with expression that most folks don't want to blend in. They want to tell you what they stand for or who they are. So we let our clothing do the talking. And Protect Trans Kids is one of our top sellers. Be Kind is also one of our best sellers, but we try to be as expressive as possible. And this is just about this. I won't spend too long, but we have created something really unique called Get Phluid, which is gender expansive training. I started speaking to corporations after about a year in this business, and started learning from leaders in companies that they weren't ready for this community, this force of Gen Z that is now moving through universities. And the first thing they do is my mom said this to me. She said, I think you're onto something, because my nieces went away to university, and the first thing they do is share their pronouns. And now these young folks are going to the workforce, and they expect pronouns to be addressed. They expect, there to be space, an affirming space for folks who identify in the binary. And so we're helping companies get ready for this workforce to create a space for Generation Z in corporate America. So this is something that I didn't set out to do, but found that it was something I wanted to share my knowledge with as many people as possible. And then often it is like people say, how can I be an ally, especially to Gen Z? It's really understanding the things you can do. And then I would just say that my call to action for most folks is to become an ally first, and then step into a role of advocacy and help create a space for all people, especially young people who identify in ways different than us than we have in the past. The same way we did with lesbian women and gay men, same thing we did. We're doing it again now with gender identity. I think we're wrapping it up. So we have the responsibility to make inclusion a daily thought, a daily action. So one day we can just eliminate the word inclusion and just let people be free to be who they want to be. And Gen Z's pushing us this way. All right, now we get to go change the world. All right, now I'll stop and take some questions. Thanks for your patience along this journey. All right, let's go. I have one question. Do you believe the Gen Z audience consumer will be, oh, it just disappeared. There it is. Let me find the questions. Q&A. I'm gonna text it to me, okay? There's questions coming in. Here we go. We're going live. Let's see. In your opinion, as a consumer, what brands are leaders in this space? So who's doing a good job in this space for fashion apparel? I think ASOS is doing a pretty good job. If you follow ASOS, I think that they're probably the best because their price point's accessible, and they also create collections that are gender free. So they're doing a good job. And yeah, I'll just highlight them because I'm super impressed with what they're doing. How does marketing to Gen Z different from marketing to millennial audiences? I think the difference is that the story matters. They're going to begin to continue to shift away from this whole idea of like status symbol, and the new status symbol is going to be socially responsible brands, environmentally responsible brands. So I think that is going to be the shift, and those will be the brands that will go from Supreme to whoever the next Supreme is will have a responsible part of who they are. Can heritage brands learn from new digital first brands when it comes to authentic? Absolutely. We speak a lot to them. I think it's where's your authentic, honest voice coming through. It can't just be from marketing. It has to actually come from the inside of the company. That it can't just be a marketing campaign. It has to come from the inside first and then come externally. So I think it's really about how do you harness what that is and then be willing to take the risks, but look inside your company to find those voices to help you. How do you target this new demographic in an effective way without losing older customer bases? Yeah, I mean, that's the struggle. That's for a iconic company like Macy's, who I used to work for. That's something for them to think about. If you have a young company, you don't really care about the losing older customer base, but that's a dance and a dilemma. I think there's ways to do both. I mean, you might not keep the million moms away from you, but you will find that companies like Target are doing a really good job. I think as a big company, they have created all-inclusive, or they're creating all-inclusive restrooms. At the same time, they've said that they're transgender. They have a transgender policy for their stores. So they're really vocal about who they are and what they stand for. This question is just rolling in. How do you approach emerging media channels, and how do they factor in your overall strategy? And first of all, I wish I had more money to actually spend time in media channels, but my visibility is, there's two that matter, three that are YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And that's the only places that I spend time and energy. I don't know what else there is, but that's where everyone is all the time. What do you see as the biggest future challenge to retail and e-commerce and the biggest opportunity? That's such a great question. I think using the digital experience to share your story, to share your brand story, and to share how the brand is lifting communities that have not been lifted before, and to share the values. You can't do that in a really physical space, but it's really much easier to do in a digital place. And so I think we have a great opportunity to use our social media to have representation and visibility. Sometimes I feel really bad and for brands who still have like thin or muscular Caucasian people with classic, beauty from the last, whatever decade, but a couple of decades. But I think that when I look at brands who have body positive, differently abled, gender nonconforming in their expression, models, that these are brands that will start to, continue to resonate, and the impact we'll have on business is massive. I think it's thinking differently. But that's also doing the hard work inside the company as well, not just making it external facing, but also internally facing. I think I got most of them. Did I miss anything? Young consumers highly value authenticity. What makes a brand authentic in 2020? It's such a fine line. Like $1 million to Black Lives Matter matters, but it's like, what are you doing going forward? How are you working to be inclusive of all individuals? How's the company creating affirming space for people? How are you, promoting people and creating mentorships, and then externally facing, just with representation and visibility is what I would say is what's going to make it, and sharing your values, not being afraid to lean into doing the right thing. People often think the right thing, a social issue is a political issue. I think we have to draw the line and say politics are politics and social issues are social issues, and not let them blend into each other. That's it, David. You're going to shut me up.
On the contrary, actually, I'm going to be asking you a few more questions and not letting you off the hook so easily, but we can treat it conversationally, and you have a live face, so it's not just words coming at the screen. So there's that.
Okay.
Rob, I mean, it was a terrific talk, and it's such a weighty subject. I mean, it's the things that you shared. It's super relevant. You have a generation that absolutely is looking at gender completely differently from previous generations, definitely in scale and with complexity that we maybe haven't seen as openly compared to the past. So on that note, I'd love for you to just think looking forward. I mean, we have this generation right now that essentially is going to be the next generation of leaders. And think about everything you've just said in terms of the changes that they're already involved in and that the way they're looking at identity. What do you foresee when we have this generation that moves into leadership positions in companies, in brands, in corporations? What do you how could you envision that playing out, given what you know about Gen Z?
Yeah, I think, listen, when Gen Z steps into a company, I have a feeling they're going to be very vocal about what exists and doesn't exist, around what inclusion looks like, about what representation looks like. They're going to walk in and look at the leadership team, and they're probably going to decide if they want to stay there very long or not, based on who the leaders are, what they look like, and what they stand for. Now, listen, as a white cis man, I mean, I can still be white, cisgendered, 55-year-old guy, but have the right values and the right intention, and share my words, but also follow it up with actions, and that means working harder to be inclusive. But I think it's really important for, all of us to sit down with young people and understand what's important from them, and then what the company can do. But these folks will, continue to work into leadership positions. I think that, what's so strange is this things we've been fighting so hard for the last 50 years will eventually begin to, hopefully, with work in progress, disintegrate. So this idea that, the hard work we're doing around female rights, the hard work we're doing around gay rights, the hard work we're doing around, racial equality and representation. I think that this generation, and this is our job right now, but they're going to kind of collectively shrug when they get there. If we do our job right, if we really do our work now around race, if we do it around gender, meaning female, if we do it around, lesbian and gay, I mean, we will create the space that this generation lives in where things don't matter to them. But if we live in a space where we're not addressing it, it's gonna be a problem. But it's so bizarre. Like when I had the store and parents would come in, they'd be like, "This is amazing! Can you believe this?" And their kids would be like, "What's the big deal?" Like they literally weren't that impressed.
Yeah. So I see what you're saying. It's almost like fast forward 10, 15 years ago, when all of this is all the more mainstream and they're getting into their corporate roles. Yeah, you bring up a good point. Depending on what the company is and where they are at on their journey and what the culture looks like, it may be a different dynamic. So that's a fair point.
Yeah, so the work is doing it now to make sure that when they're set up for that we have done the work, around the topics I talked about around inclusion. I think we need to also include talking about folks who are differently abled. I think that's something that we don't probably talk enough about. But also the environment, as something else. But yeah, I just think it's making the advances right now. So when they get there, we're not focused on identity anymore. We're focused on, humans. Yeah.
So somewhat related.
That's my future.
Oh, that's good. And this is almost going to be a follow-up question because it's somewhat related, because I think one of the things that you said in terms of they're going to walk into a company and they're either going to decide they're going to stay there or walk out the door. And you didn't say this explicitly, but I think it's inferred that it's based on the values that they see being both talked about and lived at the company, right? So you showed your values, right?
Yep.
I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of inside baseball on how you got to that list, on just the process, and to distill it down to that and align on that, because it's something that I know a lot of brands are looking over, maybe they had values that go back 30, 40 years and they're dusting them off and they're reassessing, right? You probably didn't have that scenario, but what did it go like? What was it, the process that you went through to get to that sort of very purposeful set of values?
It was first of all, it's so much fun starting a company. When you've worked for, companies that are over 100 years old, and most of the companies I work for are very, whether they're 50 years old or 100 years old or 150 years old, to come in and start a company fresh. The first thing I did was my mission statement, which took about, I don't know, 3 days of working sessions. I tried to get it to 3 words, but I could get it to 4, which is challenge boundaries with humanity. So everything we did was challenging.
3 days, 3 days to get to that line. I mean, I want people to understand that something that, gets to that level of simplicity does take time and effort.
Yeah, and about 8 people in a room. I mean,
yep.
And I finally walked away with 4 words, but they wanted 3. It was. But what I was saying was, we're going to challenge things. We're going to be challenging everything, but we're going to do it with humanity. We're going to do it with a good heart. We don't stand against anything. We stand for things. We don't stand against, we just stand for things. And I think that, Generation Z is the same thing, that they are vocal about what they stand for. And then the values was a group effort. I hired a team and a collective process, and also like a full day work session where whittling until we got to those values.
Was your team all people in the company, or did you bring in some outsiders as well?
I brought an outside consultant, folks, the trans community, non-binary community, and all of my employees were from the queer community, and all much younger than me. And it was words that really, both aligned with me and the brand, but also were supported and by them as well.
Got it.
It's like having a child. I mean, in a way, it was like,
absolutely. And I did see your eyes sort of light up in a very positive way. I could see that it resonated with you, that you didn't have the legacy issues. So yeah, you're right. You got to sort of build it from scratch, and that in itself is a bit of a privilege, but it still takes work to get it right.
Yep.
So I want to get an insight from you on, you're obviously clearly very focused on this generation, and you're nailing it in all the right ways in terms of, again, just hitting on this sort of game changer of attitudes on gender and identity. Are you beginning to, or are you already thinking about the next generation, or are you just focused on right now Gen Z?
I focus on Gen Z. I'll tell you where my headset is going, though, and I'm trying to find the right way to do it. I'm thinking about parents who are having this next generation. I'm thinking about, I'm working on ways to create the Phluid project for children, for young people. There are a lot of alphas who, parents challenge with alphas because big box retailers, major, brands only we still are in a binary construct of boys and girls.
Right.
Just saw my friends yesterday who, had a child, and the work they have to go through to not dress their daughter in pink, it takes an effort. And these small brands that are, Dutch or Swedish, and they're looking really hard with boutique brands to find a solution to dressing their child. And so for me, whether they're, phase 2.5 to, 8-year-olds, like, want to express themselves, whether, and by the way, has nothing to do, their expression, with their sexual orientation or their gender identity. It's just a time when a kid is curious. And how do you, I helped launch Mattel's Creatable World, which is the first non-gender doll. And pretty remarkable, the reaction it got. So you could take this doll and dress it which way, put which hair, and really didn't have a gender, and allowed kids to, whether they're just to play and explore. It's really fun.
So I think, again, without you sort of saying it straight out, acknowledging the parent dynamic, obviously, for the next generation is important, because Gen Z is definitely, I have two Gen Z boys. I mean, I'm still their parent, but it's a way different dynamic. They make their own decisions. They're, segueing into adulthood, and some Gen Zers are well on their way into adulthood. So the parent dynamic for that future generation, I could see how that's an important consideration.
That's who I'm thinking about, because these young kids can't make decisions right now. Gen
Of
Z
course.
is making decisions, is doing research, is telling their parents what they think, is influencing family decisions. They're one demographic that is, very clear, and they want transparency, and they want authenticity, and they also can call bullshit when they see it. And I think that the next generation is really speaking to the generation of parents, to your point, because they can't talk. They can talk, but they can't. And then it's the parents' job to go find what they're looking for to support that
Yeah.
children.
So Brand Innovators needs to do a Gen Alpha parents of Gen Alpha at some point, because that's going to be the next big one. Well, Rob, thank you. This was insightful. It's important work. You clearly take it very seriously. I appreciate how, even though you're an ally of the community and you're very aware that your life experiences are different, yet you're obviously knee deep in this, and this is something you're really passionate about. So the way you speak about it is just very inspiring. So thank you for sharing everything with us.
I feel like if we can't do that at this time in our lives, like, it's our responsibility as humans to make way for a next generation who's going to inherit this planet, and this. So that's my commitment. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
dive. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Okay. So